Hello and welcome back to Walk the Cinema podcast. Today's episode, we are going all the way back to the 1930s with City Lights. So, City Lights, you recommended this movie, I think, for us to review.
Well, it is about the movie. I mean, we're going to be talking about the movie, but it's also about Charlie Chaplin.
For those that, you know.
For his friends.
For his pals.
Because I don't know if this is his biggest movie or Modern Times would be his biggest movie, but that's not important.
I feel like I associate the poster the most with Chaplin.
Like his image?
Yeah, the image.
I don't know. I kind of watched Modern Times more growing up and even now, and I like that better. But we're going to, focus on City Lights the most today.
Right. So for those of you that may not have seen it, because this was my first watch through, like a lot of the ones that we seem to talk about.
Yeah, and I keep rewatching because that's my life.
The movie is about this tramp.
That's the famous Chaplin character.
Mm-hmm.
It's the tramp.
Who befriends both a blind woman, kind of falls in love with her.
Yeah. And
befriends a millionaire. And it's just kind of about his journey through that. And, the problems with it, because the billionaire only is his friend when he's blackout drunk, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, the movie, in the beginning, if you're watching, the screen says it's a comedy romance. So I think it is mostly a rom-com. It's mostly focused on Chaplin doing everything he can to make this girl's life nicer.
Yeah, better.
Because, it's not that he feels bad for her. He kind of just really likes her immediately.
Yeah, he's like taken by her.
Yeah, so that's already a good start. Because I feel like there's a lot of movies where you just feel sorry for her. But he doesn't feel sorry for her. It's not that at all. So it's a little nicer.
Mm-hmm. I see what you're saying. I was immediately kind of captivated by it. Even the opening scene, I was already like, I'm gonna like this. I don't know why. It just really hit the spot perfectly for me, where I could see it. It felt more or less timeless for me. There's some well-established movies, I think, that sometimes they're popular, but I don't think that they're necessarily timeless.
Sure.
But I feel that City Lights does hit that point for me, where it feels like this wasn't made almost 100 years ago. It feels like it could have been made today, sans the...
Well, okay, this is a silent film.
Yeah, sans the speaking.
But the thing is, this was made when the talkies were being made. So they could record sound. They chose not to. And Chaplin was the only one that could do that at that point. Because this is 31.
Mm-hmm.
31 is when Dracula came out, So voice is very much established in cinema at this point. But he went for a silent movie, but it's not a silent movie like the silent era movies were. It does use some techniques that did not exist in the peak of silent films.
Mm-hmm. Like the sound effects.
Yeah, the sound effects. With like Modern Times, for example, it did the same thing, but there's like a character that talks from a screen. So he's taking advantage that he could use these new techniques and implement it into a silent film and make it better than the other silent films.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was most of the thinking in doing it like that. Also, he's better when he doesn't talk, I'll be honest. I don't even think a lot of people know his voice.
I can confidently say I don't know his voice. I do know his big speech that he kind of did about, not necessarily about Hitler, but about the dictatorship,
He made The Great Dictator, which is another very well-known Chaplin movie.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think that he's very much associated with silent films, and City Lights being one of them.
Which is not a silent film from the silent era, which is the part that makes it feel more modern, especially in relation to other silent films, because there's more technology that we use now in it that makes it feel more related to now than when they didn't have sound at all and just used music, which this mostly uses music. The sound effects aren't like super important throughout, but they do help a lot in like the little things.
Yeah, I think it's a sweet story.
Yeah,
I think it's got fun elements.
there's
And
comedy bits that will make everyone laugh.
yes,
I mean, I think the most iconic one, that's probably his most iconic scene, period, is the boxing scene where he's fighting the new guy that shows up to replace the other, and he does, the kind of repetitive physical comedy. Which, if I gotta be devil's advocate, which I love the film, but there's a lot of flaws. I do think the sketches are repetitive within themselves. It repeats a lot of the same movements in the same sketch. Which, most of the comedy still works for me. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it is, repetitive at points.
I do kind of somewhat agree. I think that for me, the thing that makes me not necessarily love and treasure this movie, I guess, is the elements of it. Or it more focuses on the comedy aspect than the romance in this rom-com, which is fine.
It's what it did best.
But I feel that it may over-rely on the slapstick nature of physical comedy, which at the time I think is what people wanted. I think that's what you kind of went to see the movies. Like if you were going to see something like a rom-com, you wanted to see that kind of slapstick.
Especially out of him.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because he kind of did, in a sense, box him into a category. And I think it was probably hard for him to do anything outside of it.
But I also think that him doing that and doing exactly what people at the time wanted to see is what makes him last more. Because people aren't talking about Buster Keaton nearly as much. Errol Lloyd, to me, was the best silent comedian. I think he was better at physical sketches than Chaplin was. But we don't talk about him because he didn't pander as much.
Well, I just feel like I know that, Charlie Chaplin is in his own type of category. I think that there are probably classes taught on just his films and his movie making.
I never studied or looked too deeply into silent film knowledge.
But I think he's obviously very present in film community. And
I mean, he's one of the first images I remember from movies because he's so individual looking. Let's say that. I don't want to offend him. He has a look that, to me, as a very young kid, I knew his name and I knew his face before I knew his movies.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that because of the way that he did movies in this kind of very specific style that was of his time, it kind of doesn't bridge as well as I think some other people do, if that makes sense.
Like, give me an example.
So, for example, if you look at Hitchcock's work,
sure. You don't watch Hitchcock work from the silent era, though. No one does.
Well, that's true, but I'm just saying...
He did a lot of movies in silent film.
But I'm saying that, like, even his work in terms of the talkies, like, take one of my favorite Hitchcock movies, the Lady Vanishes, that came out in the 30s, and I feel like that movie could have been made yesterday, And so I think that with Charlie Chaplin, he doesn't have that sort of timelessness, right? Where I think that City Lights does a really amazing job, I think, at being timeless, but that doesn't feel like it was made yesterday.
Sure.
It definitely does feel like it was made distantly.
It stands the test of time, but it's not going to be remade as a slapstick.
Right. Like, if you had to remake that movie, you would not make it the kind of comedy that he made it. You know what I
wouldn't
mean?
work, especially if you use sound. It wouldn't work.
Yeah, but even if you artistically chose to make it a silent film, you wouldn't use the kind of comedy
That's true.
today, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of older comedy acts that did sound and still like moved in the same way that the silent comedies did.
Mm-hmm.
Like their physical comedy, like throwing pies and that type of thing. And they don't really work great anymore. They work as a time capsule film that you look at and you're like, this is what people are watching, this is cool, but it could still be good and you could enjoy it, definitely, but it's still not something...
It doesn't...
Sorry.
Yeah, it doesn't stand the test of time.
No,
like, in that way.
It's not something that would be popular now the same way that City Lights still is. I mean, the top Chaplin movies, Modern Times, City Lights, Great Dictator, those are all movies that every person that gets into movies watches. Because they still work and they're the best examples of that type of movie.
Well, I think another significant thing about this movie in terms of like historical aspects is the fact that Charlie Chaplin did make this as... I don't know if you would consider it as a rebellion against talkies, but I think he definitely makes it a point to make it a silent film and not a talkie.
But that kind of historical. This movie has historical figures all over it. Winston Churchill showed up at the set, which is crazy to think about. That wouldn't happen now. I don't think there's anyone big enough to get, someone that big into their set just to hang out. Albert Einstein was at the premiere. Chaplin said that he cried at the premiere. Einstein did. So
I do think that the ending is the most emotional part.
The ending is perfect. Even though it's a little silly, right? That she just can see now.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would work, but she recognizing him is literally perfect.
Yeah, because she recognizes the feel of his hands.
Yeah.
And his arm, And
his voice a little bit, I think. And she just feels connected to him.
Yeah.
From touching him. And yeah, that was really good. Because he wasn't trying to make her be with him because he paid for stuff. Or because he helped her.
Yeah.
So he didn't say who he was when he showed up. And she recognized it because she likes him and she recognized the small things about him.
Yeah. I feel like I can't really name a specific movie I feel like has taken inspiration of that, but I feel like I have watched several movies that have kind of had that same vibe where one of the characters doesn't necessarily know who the identity of the other character is, and then, having that kind of realization.
Well, this movie's super important for directors. I know Orson Welles, this is his favorite movie. And I think this is Chaplin's favorite work of his. So I think he did use a lot of it on his later works. Because, to him, that's the perfect movie. That's the perfect movie he made, is City Lights. So why not, always steal a little bit here and there from his own movie.
Yeah. I feel like that's always good to hear or it's always interesting to hear which movie is the director's favorite, or like even the actor's favorite movie to portray, because sometimes I feel like the best movie by audience standards is not the best movie that the director or the actor even thinks,
because the audience wasn't there. They don't know every little detail of it, even if they are like those people that obsess over a movie and study it, and they know everything about it, and they know everything about it, they still didn't experience it firsthand. So, yeah, well, in this case, I mean, it's his biggest movie. But in a lot of cases, there's, like, movies you wouldn't expect the director to pick or the actor to pick, and that's even more fun.
Yeah, I definitely think... from my understanding, this movie took them 2 years to film it. which sounds kind of crazy.
It does.
But, you know, back then, I'm sure there was issues with how much they could film at one time, the financing that went into it.
I know Chaplin was super obsessed with some scenes that he reshot like a lot.
That probably burned up a lot of film.
I think he did like close to 400 takes on how he found out that the girl was blind.
Oh my god.
Because he wanted a realistic way that he would find it out. So it was her touching the floor, not looking at the floor, touching the floor and asking if he picked it up.
Mm-hmm.
That was when he nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, you know, great the way he did it, but they tried a lot of ways to do it, and he was never happy, and he wouldn't go forward with it until he was perfect in his eyes.
Yeah, I think that this, or at least Charlie, had a very meticulous way of filmmaking, which is, you know, has its pros and its cons, you know. Sometimes I assume working with that kind of person is probably a little bit infuriating, but, you know, sometimes it pays off.
I don't know his legacy in personal life. Like, I don't know if people liked him, if people wanted to work with him. I'm not sure. But he did a lot of stuff. Like a lot of shorts that I don't particularly love. So I think his big work is big and great and amazing, but he did a lot of not great stuff too, in my opinion. So I don't know. There's a lot of directors like that. We can't all be Kubricks or Tarkovskys, you know. Can always nail it.
Yeah, but I do think that this is a very well done movie, and, you know, I could definitely see why it has stood the test of time. It is funny, even though I'm not like a huge fan of the kind of physical comedy. Like, I've never liked physical comedy all that much. I do think some aspects of it are really funny in this.
Yeah.
Like the scene where it's not necessarily slapstick, but when the millionaire takes him to the restaurant and it's a plate of spaghetti and the streamers come down from the ceiling, and he starts eating the spaghetti, but then he also gets a piece of the streamer and he's just eating that.
Yeah.
As well, like from the ceiling. Like, that was kind of funny.
I do think even if you don't like the story or you're not super engaged in the story, you will still laugh at it. Like, you will laugh basically every time that he intends you to laugh. You might just not feel the other emotions, but that's up to you. But I don't think the laughing you can, because it is really well done.
Yeah, it is.
Especially, I'm going to repeat, the boxing scene is amazing, and it's the most iconic tramp scene of all time.
Yeah, but it feels so weird that's, again, this is the first time that I'd seen it, and it feels weird that that's like the most iconic scene in this romance.
I just think it's the funniest.
Yeah,
like, individually.
But I mean, even like, I know about that scene, you know, before I watched the movie. Didn't really realize what the movie was about. So it feels kind of disconnected in a way. Like,
it does. Yeah, I know what you mean.
From the movie.
Yeah, because it's not super what you'd expect from it.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense in the storyline, I guess. He's boxing this person because he's trying to win money so that the blind girl doesn't get evicted from her house.
Yeah, well, he had a deal to split the money, which was exactly how much money he needed, but then that didn't go well, so he had to actually fight for it.
But you wouldn't expect that scene really in this movie, I think, if you didn't know anything about it, right?
Right.
So
no, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. They seem...
This is why I listen to Walk the Cinema podcast. Because you give me great indications, and I just love it.
Aw, that's really sweet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that everything about this movie really does scream iconic, I guess.
Yeah. It's something you gotta watch. Yeah. I mean, I think you gotta watch all the Chaplin major work. Like, at least the top 3. if not even Gold Rush and The Kid.
Yeah, The Kid I would also put on that list.
So, I mean, that's at least 3 movies you gotta watch, maybe 5, and then the rest is up to you if you like him. If you never saw any Harold Lloyd, I suggest that. Especially his shorts, I think are much better than Chaplin shorts. Maybe not the feature lengths, though. But yeah, we gotta rate it, because that's what we do here.
I gave it a 8 out of 10. I think that I immediately liked it. Even that beginning scene where he wakes up on the statue. I could immediately see the longevity of it from that opening scene. And so I did like it. I do have some problems with it, like I said, about I think it personally I think it relies too much on the comedy and not on the particular storyline. So when I hear like Einstein cried after viewing it, or that it is certain people's favorite movie, I don't necessarily get it.
Are you calling Einstein dumb?
No. But I didn't get that emotion. I do think that the ending is the most emotional part. I do think it's sweet. Would I cry over it? Absolutely not. But that might be because, I cry at very emotionally manipulative things, so.
I also give it an 8. This is my favorite year in movies, 1931. And this is like maybe my 4th or 5th favorite movie from the year. So I guess I just liked the type of movie that was being made that particular year more than a silent comedy.
Yeah.
That feels it's older, but at the same time it doesn't because of all the technological advances. So yeah, it's super interesting. It's mandatory. Like, this is a mandatory film. If you like film, if you study film, if you want to make film, if you want to be a critic, if you want to be, just a letterbox reviewer, you gotta watch this. Not to compare it to anything, but just as its own work of art. It's really important, but yeah, storyline's not great. It's not super solid. Okay, it definitely works for what he's trying to do, but he's trying to make you laugh.
Yeah, he's trying to make you laugh, and I don't think that back then plot lines were the major thing. Especially this is, a Great Depression era film.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to get too hard hitting with those types of movies.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies from this exact year that I think the screenplay is secondary to the visuals still.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're still kind of coming off the silent era. So, like, Dracula, I've mentioned this in the Nosferatu episode, but the Dracula from 1931, I don't love the screenplay at all. Not that I love Dracula, period, but Dracula is a little weak. Svengali is something that, like, created a word and a term, but I couldn't tell you the storyline off of the top of my head.
Yeah, I do think that, there is probably a more qualified person that actually knows the answer to this, but I wonder if because these are made in the Great Depression era, like, the idea behind movies was to just get people in based on, like, some type of wow factor, and the wow factor is never going to be the plotline, because you're not going to know what the plotline is before going in,
Yeah, with Frankenstein, same year, you got the visual aspect of, it's Boris Karloff. Now it's iconic. At the time, no, but it immediately became iconic. I mean, if you saw that poster on the street in 31, you saw the Frankenstein makeup.
You're probably like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, especially after you've seen Dracula, and you're like, damn, that's cool. And, I mean, you got M, the German movie, that the main actor is a really good actor and has done a lot of good work, but his look, I'm sure, helped a lot with him being chosen for it. So yeah, there's a lot of visual preference, I guess, in movies around that time.
Yeah, visual and comedic preference over more serious or...
So yeah, I can't say I love this movie or it's one of the best movies of all time, because the screenplay is just doesn't stack up to the rest, personally.
But yeah, it's not trying to, so, you know.
Yeah.
But it's still very good. And obviously, we've talked about it, how good it is, and why we think it's important. So we obviously think it's worthwhile. But
Yeah.
I think that'll wrap up this episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave us a comment if you can, rate us if you want to, and we'll see you next time.